All right, let's get into this. You think about the internet, right? It feels kind of ethereal, just data floating around.
Yeah, like it's just out there
Yeah,
in the cloud.
exactly. But the reality is it's all running on physical stuff. Cables under the ocean, big buildings full of routers.
Very real, very tangible infrastructure.
And what if inside one of those ordinary-looking buildings, someone had set up shop in a specific room
Okay.
and was just like making copies of everything flowing through emails, searches, calls?
Wow. And not just any old copies, but feeding them into some seriously heavy-duty analysis gear, maybe run by, let's say, the government.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. We're talking about a real place, a location that became almost legendary in privacy circles. It's known as Room 641A.
Room 641A. It sounds like something out of a spy novel.
Doesn't it? So our mission today, using the sources we've got, articles, legal docs, technical stuff, is to really unpack this. What was this room? How did we even find out about it? Who blew the whistle?
And crucially, what does this whole story tell us about surveillance back then, and maybe even, what might be happening now?
Yeah. We've got some really interesting material here. Technical specs, the whole legal fight, the history, even the personal angle of the guy who brought it to light.
It's fascinating how one physical room, just bricks and mortar, could symbolize such a huge, hidden digital surveillance effort.
Totally. So let's start with the basics. Room 641A, where was it and what actually happened there?
Okay, so geographically, Room 641A was inside an AT&T building, specifically their facility at 611 Folsom Street in San Francisco.
Just a room in a big telco building.
Right, but a very important building, a major node for internet traffic on the West Coast. Think of it like a huge highway interchange for data.
And obviously the whole point was secrecy. So how did the story break? Who spilled the beans?
That's where it gets really interesting. It came down to one person, an AT&T technician who worked in that facility. His name was Mark Klein.
Just a guy doing his job.
Pretty much. But he started noticing things. Equipment being installed that wasn't standard AT&T gear. Weird wiring setups.
Weird how?
Well, the sources specifically mentioned beam splitters. He was even asked to help the government people running the room when they had tech issues, so he got a direct look.
Beam splitters, that sounds optical, like lasers or something.
Exactly. Fiber optics use light. These splitters were designed to peel off a portion of the light signal from the main fiber optic cables.
So literally making a copy of the light which carries the data.
Precisely. Creating an exact duplicate of the data stream flowing through AT&T's network at that point. A massive amount of data.
Okay, so they're copying the data stream. Where did the copied data go? It wasn't just being saved to a hard drive, was it?
Oh no. These duplicate streams were routed into some very powerful analysis machines. The main one mentioned is the Naros STA 6400.
Naros STA 6400, what did that do?
Think of it as a super intelligent vacuum cleaner for data. It could apparently sift through internet traffic at incredibly high speeds, emails, web browsing, VoIP calls looking for, well, whatever its operators told it to look for. Patterns, keywords, connections.
So Klein sees this whole setup, copying everything, feeding it into these analysis engines. What's going through his head?
He was deeply disturbed. He understood the power of what he was seeing, essentially unfiltered access to vast amounts of private communications.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He was worried enough that he decided to keep copies of internal AT&T documents, blueprints, wiring diagrams, installation orders, things that showed exactly how this secret room was connected to the main network.
Wow, that's risky, but crucial, it turns out.
Absolutely pivotal. Without those documents, it might have just remained a rumor.
Now, this Room 641A, it wasn't just some isolated experiment in San Francisco, right? It was part of a much larger picture.
That's right. You have to zoom out. Room 641A was one node, a key piece of physical evidence for a much wider government surveillance program, a warrantless one.
Warrantless, meaning operating outside the normal legal checks.
Correct. This program was authorized by President George W. Bush in the period right after the 9/11 attacks. The key thing is, it bypassed the established legal framework, specifically the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or FISC.
Which was set up precisely to oversee domestic intelligence gathering.
Yes. That court was supposed to approve warrants for this kind of thing. But this program, initially at least, operated outside that system.
And the public didn't know about this right away.
No, not at all. The existence of this broad, warrantless wiretapping only became public knowledge in December 2005. That's when the New York Times finally published a big story about it. Apparently, they'd had this story for a while.
Interesting. And the government wasn't just doing this on its own, tapping wires in secret. They needed help from the companies that owned the wires, right?
That's a critical element. The sources make it clear the NSA and other agencies were demanding access from the big telecom companies. They wanted the ability to monitor communications and store the data.
They called them collection partnerships, didn't they?
Yes, these partnerships were key. Declassified info and market data strongly suggest the main partners, referred to as Company A and Company B in some documents, were AT&T and Verizon.
And why them specifically?
Well, for instance, FCC data from back then showed AT&T handled a huge chunk of international calls originating or terminating in the U.S. That matches descriptions of one of the key partners. These deals basically gave the NSA direct access to tap into the core fiber optic infrastructure.
But not every company just rolled over.
That's an important detail. The sources highlight that at least one major telecom, Qwest, actually refused. They apparently wouldn't grant access without proper warrants, citing privacy obligations to their customers.
That must have taken some guts.
You'd think so, yeah. It shows there was definitely awareness within the industry about the legal lines being crossed.
Okay, let's talk scale. You mentioned tapping the core infrastructure. What does that actually mean in terms of what was collected? This wasn't like listening in on one person's phone?
No, absolutely not. This is what's called upstream, or bulk collection. It's fundamentally different from targeted surveillance.
Can you break that down? Upstream versus targeted?
Sure. Targeted surveillance is what most people think of, like a traditional wiretap. Law enforcement gets a warrant for a specific person's phone line or email based on probable cause. Upstream collection happens, well, upstream further up the data flow.
Closer to the main pipes.
Exactly. At major internet peering points or gateways like the AT&T facility, they're intercepting everything flowing through that point. Huge volumes of aggregated data from many, many users.
So even if the official reason was foreign intelligence.
The practical reality of tapping a major U.S. internet backbone meant you were inevitably scooping up purely domestic communications too. If you emailed someone overseas, or even if your domestic email just happened to route through that San Francisco node, boom, your data gets copied.
There was no way to just grab the foreign stuff at that point.
Not easily. Not at the point of collection on those massive fiber lines. The filtering and analysis happened after the bulk collection in systems like the NARIS device. So millions of Americans' communications likely got swept up incidentally.
The sheer volume is just hard to picture.
It really is. Think about all the emails, website visits, maybe even the content of phone calls going through those fiber lines every second. Tapping that allows for collection on an industrial scale. The limit wasn't the law initially. It was the processing power of the analysis machines.
So when Klein's documents came out and the NYT story broke, lawsuits must have followed pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, was right on it. They filed a landmark lawsuit against AT&T in January 2006. That's the Joule v. NSA case.
And what was their argument?
Basically that AT&T had illegally handed over its customers' communications and records to the government without warrants, violating privacy laws and the Constitution. Klein's documents were key evidence in that suit.
How did the government react to these legal challenges and the public backlash? Did they shut it down?
Well, it's complicated, politically and legally. What ultimately happened was Congress stepped in and passed the FISA Amendments Act of 2008.
Okay, and what did that do?
Among other things, it essentially gave retroactive legal authorization to aspects of the very program that had been operating without warrants. It also granted retroactive immunity to the telecom companies that had cooperated.
So they changed the law after the fact to cover what had been done.
That's a simplification,
Yeah.
but it captures a key effect. It reshaped the legal landscape for this kind of surveillance going forward, and it addressed the legality of past actions. It also brings us back to FISA itself, the original 1978 Act.
Right. That was supposed to prevent this kind of thing.
It was enacted specifically because of past abuses uncovered in the 1970s, things the government had been doing for decades without oversight.
Like what kind of abuses?
The big one the sources draw parallels to is Operation Shamrock. This ran for like 30 years, from the 40s into the 70s.
30 years. What was it?
Major telegraph companies in the U.S. were quietly turning over copies of all international telegrams sent by Americans to the NSA and its predecessors. No warrants, just cooperation.
Wow. Just handing over private messages for decades.
Yeah. and it only came to light during the Church Committee investigations in the mid-70s, which looked into intelligence agency abuses. The Shamrock revelations were a huge reason FISA was created to put legal guardrails in place.
So there's a clear historical pattern here. Government wants access, companies provide it secretly, it runs for years, gets exposed, leads to reforms, and then maybe it happens again in a new technological context.
That's certainly one way to read the history. And you can trace surveillance concerns further back early state laws against wiretapping in the 1800s, the Palmer raids after WWI, debates over the census, the FBI building its fingerprint database. The tension isn't new. Even the Supreme Court weighed in on wiretaps way back in 1928 in Olmstead v. U.S.
Okay, bringing it back to the tech. How does the kind of Upstream collection in Room 641A compare to something like, say, a Stingray? People hear about those more often now.
That's a good comparison because both are forms of bulk collection, but they target different things. Room 641A was about tapping the Internet's fiber optic backbone, the big data pipes. Got it. Stingrays, or MSI catchers, target cellular networks. They pretend to be cell towers and trick phones in a certain area into connecting to them, allowing interception of calls, texts, and location data from potentially many phones nearby.
So Room 641A is like tapping the main water line for the city, and a Stingray is like putting a net over a specific neighborhood's drains.
That's actually a pretty good analogy.
Hmm.
Different layers of the communication network, different methods, but both aimed at gathering communications from groups, not just pre-identified individuals.
Let's circle back to Mark Klein, the technician who started this whole thing. What really drove him? Was he just angry or...
From what the sources say, it was more a deep concern about unchecked government power, especially presidential power. He apparently admired whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers. He saw what was happening as fundamentally wrong and felt a duty to expose it.
He even wrote a book about it, didn't he?
Yeah, Wiring Up the Big Brother Machine and Fighting It. Pretty descriptive title. Even after he retired, especially when the Snowden leaks happened later and revealed even more, Klein was willing to speak out and explain the significance of what he saw in Room 641A.
And his actions, keeping those documents and coming forward, they clearly had a massive impact.
Undeniably. Without his concrete evidence, the Jewel lawsuit would have been much harder, maybe impossible. He provided the physical proof that connected the dots between the secret program and the physical infrastructure. He made the invisible visible.
This whole story, Room 641A, it feels like it's not just a history lesson. It touches on so many issues we're still grappling with today, right?
Absolutely. It's a foundational case study for so many current debates. It highlights the tension between government surveillance and individual privacy, the role and responsibility of tech companies who hold our data, and this fundamental conflict between dragnet surveillance, bulk collection, and targeted investigations based on suspicion.
You see echoes of it everywhere.
You really do. Think about the ongoing debates over Section 702 of FISA. That's the law descended from the FISA Amendments Act we mentioned. It allows warrantless surveillance of foreigners abroad, but it inevitably sweeps up Americans' communications too. That's the same core issue as Room 641A. Or consider the arguments about encryption backdoors, or client-side scanning of messages, or the privacy implications of mass location tracking via phones, or widespread facial recognition networks. These are all modern variations on the theme of potentially massive data collection capabilities.
So the technology changes, but the core question remains. Who gets to access all this data flowing through the pipes, and what are the rules?
That's the heart of it. Room 641A was a stark demonstration of how the very infrastructure built for communication could be repurposed for surveillance, embedding it deep within the Internet's backbone.
A physical reminder of what's possible behind the scenes.
Exactly. And while laws changed and lawsuits were fought, the basic technological capability didn't vanish. The tension is still there.
Okay, so let's try to sum up this deep dive. Room 641A, a real room in an AT&T building in San Francisco.
Equipped with things like beam splitters to copy vast amounts of internet traffic.
Feeding into analysis machines like the Norris device as part of a secret, warrantless government surveillance program authorized after 9/11.
Revealed thanks to the courage of a technician, Mark Klein, who kept crucial documents.
Which led to major lawsuits by groups like the EFF and eventually new legislation, the FISA Amendments Act, that both authorized aspects of the program and gave immunity to cooperating companies.
And while that specific room and program might be history, the story serves as a critical marker. It shows the scale of potential surveillance built into the Internet's core and has echoes in many ongoing privacy debates.
It's a really powerful reminder of the capabilities hidden within the systems we use every single day, and why transparency and oversight are so crucial.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As our lives get even more digital, as more and more data flows through these networks, what new Room 641As might exist today? What unseen systems could be collecting data on a massive scale right now?
And maybe just as important, who's watching the watchers? Who has the responsibility and the courage, like Mark Klein did, to speak up if they find them?